Hello, I'm Tracy Flanagan with FGTV. Welcome to Talk Fulton. Today we have a very special guest. Please welcome the Fulton County Tax Commissioner, Dr. Arthur Ferdinand. Dr. Ferdinand, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very, very welcome. This is a great opportunity for me too.
Well, we are so glad that we could get on your busy schedule to be able to talk to you and get to know you better, talk about taxes, and we have some surprises coming up where things people may not know, and we're going to talk about that. But as we get started, tell us, how did you come to Fulton County?
I work for IBM. I spent the first part of my professional life in IBM, mainly in New York. But in 1987, I was sent down here from IBM headquarters to take over a unit that was underperforming. It was initially slated as a 2-year temporary assignment. At the end of that 2 year, my wife decided that she was not going back to that cold country, New York, because she is from South Carolina. She is from Easley, South Carolina, which is right next to Greenville, for those who don't know. And I decided to stay here and finish off my IBM career in Fulton County. So I retired from IBM.
Okay. And is it fair to call you a mathematician?
Some people call me a mathematician. Some people call me a physicist. My bachelor's degree is in mathematics, pure mathematics, from London University. I got a first-class honors there, and from that, I won a scholarship to do a PhD any place I wanted to. And so I went to London University, King's College London, and made a switch. I decided to do something a little more difficult, and I took on mathematical physics. Even though I never did physics after high school, I decided to take this on, and people thought it was a death wish, but I worked through it. And I got my PhD in mathematical physics, and I was invited to Cornell to do postdoctoral work here. And so I go either way. And after I left Cornell and went to IBM, most of the papers I published were all mathematical papers. And so I go back and forth, depends on the mood. And I very often use some of the principles I learned in physics, especially in the properties of nature and matter, to do things in mathematics that weren't addressed. And so, for example, that book that I published is a mathematical book, but a lot of the principles in the back of my head came from my experiences in physics. And so I could go either way. So I'm not insulted if you call me either.
I get it. I did take calculus. I took physics-based calculus or calculus-based physics at university. Mm-hmm. And that's when I knew that I needed to go into the liberal arts. That's when I knew.
Well, actually, in high school, my actually best subjects were the liberal arts subject. But I decided then that I didn't think I could make a living from that. And so I decided to become more of a scientist. So I dropped that. But I still remember a lot of my Shakespeare and the other, literature from way back then.
Well, one thing I will say about math is very reliable. It has the standards, and there's not a whole lot of gray area there. Math is math.
Sometimes it is.
Well, we would hope. We would hope. We would hope. So you've been in this office since 1997. That
That's
has to
correct.
be a record.
Well, right now I'd say that I'm the longest serving elected official in Fulton County. Not necessarily in history, but currently I'm the longest serving elected official.
Wow, wow. Well, talk to us a little bit about the basic functions of your office.
There's primarily one function, and that is collect taxes. That's it. But we collect in my office over $3.5 billion. When considering the county's budget is about $800 million or so, $3.5 billion. Well, that's because I collect for the city of Atlanta, the school boards, both of them, I think 6 cities, and numerous tax allocation districts and community improvement districts, and also motor vehicles. We collect over $200 million in motor vehicles. So anytime you get a tag or you see a tag on the road or a vehicle, that vehicle has to pass through Fulton County Tax Commissioner or any other tax commissioner in the state. We administer motor vehicles for the state. I collect taxes for the county. So those are 2 functions. We also collect public utility. The public utilities pay a fee. It's not a tax. It could be viewed as a tax, but it's basically, this is how much it costs to do business in Fulton County. And so there's no public utility tax. There's a big fee, you could call it a fee, that we collect from the utilities. And that's over $100 million every year.
Oh, wow.
So those are the basic functions of the tax commission: to collect taxes, administer taxes, and motor vehicles.
Well, where are we in terms of, if you could talk a little bit about the cycle for property taxes? I know the last day to file for homestead exemptions would be April 1st.
That is correct.
But how does it go throughout the rest of the year?
Well, it begins on January the 1st. Anybody who resides in a home on January the 1st, they can file, if they own that home, they could file for a homestead exemption. The last day for filing homestead exemption, if you're going to get that exemption for that year, is April 1st. But you could file for homestead exemption throughout the year. But April 1st is when the cutoff is if you're going to get an exemption for that year. But the value of the property is attached to the property on January 1st. So January 1st is a very key date in the tax calendar. April 1st is if you want to get that homestead exemption for that year. But you need to have resided in that property on January 1st. On January 1st, or thereafter, shortly afterwards, the Board of Assessors, who don't work for me, that's an independent board with a chief appraiser, they will send out a notice which would have the value of your property, the exemptions you have on that property, and it would also have an estimated rollback rate on that notice. That is not a bill. That used to confuse people because there was an estimated tax on it that was taken off this year. So instead of estimated tax, there's an estimated rollback rate. However, that notice is very important. You can appeal the value that the assessors attach to your property. You have 45 days. Or you could appeal the exemptions or lack of it on that property. You have 45 days. And so when that time expires, then we begin our job of calculating or putting together the digest, which is a compilation of every property value and all the exemptions associated with each property. And that goes to the state. And so we'll submit the digest to the state, and that has to be approved by the Revenue Commissioner, which gives us the authority then to collect taxes. We can collect taxes before the state approves the county digest. Thereafter, we would send out the bill. And usually maybe about 2 weeks or so after we get the approved digest, if things go right, we'd send out the bill. Then you have 60 days to pay the county bill. You have 45 days to pay the city bill. And every other city, it's 60 days. At the end of the 60 days, you become delinquent. Didn't pay it on time. And we send you a warning notice, which is called a 30-day notice of intent to put a lien on the property. After that, then we'd attach a lien to the property, at which time interest accrue. And that then gives people the right to purchase the lien on that property. And then you'll have to pay the lien holder. Contrary to some people's belief, when somebody purchases a lien, they do not purchase the property. They do not purchase the property. They just got the right to collect on that lien in the same manner that the tax commissioner would. with the same interest and the same penalties that the tax commissioner would. And so it doesn't cost any more if a lien holder who holds it or if you get it from me. The only difference would be some additional fees which the lien holder has to pay to the clerk of the court, which is limited by law. And so it is not very much more expensive if somebody else holds it or if I hold it. The same interest and penalty would accrue. It just puts the lien holder in the shoes of the tax commissioner to collect on that debt. Now, why is that important? It is important because very often some people are not able to pay the taxes on time. And the lien being sold is not a disaster in that you do not lose your home, but it gives you a chance to pay that debt to the lien holder. And it also gives you time, because whereas the tax commissioner could start foreclosing immediately after putting a lien, the lien holder cannot foreclose on that property for over a year.
A year and a day, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that gives you a chance to make payments on that debt to the lien holder before any adverse action is taken or attempt to be taken. And so you can work out payment plans with those lien holders. The big one, of course, is Vesta, but there are about 400 people who buy liens from us or buy liens across the state. It's just one of those. It's just one of those things that Georgia law has. A much more lenient law than some other states, where they could dispossess you of the property very, very shortly after it becomes delinquent. So sometimes people call me and say, transfer my lien because I can't pay it now, but I know you need the money to run the government. And so it gives them a chance to recover from whatever is happening in their lives.
Well, these days, you can buy just about anything on time. We have these companies, and I won't name them here. So if a person gets into a jam and they can't pay the entire amount of taxes, what are their options?
Well, first of all, the government requires revenue to pay for the services, to pay your salary, my salary, run the jail, have protection, and all the things that the government does. So it needs money to do that. The school needs money to educate the kids. And so a payment plan for everybody would not be in the best interest of any government because they need money, okay? However, when I sell liens, and people sometimes criticize me for that, the government gets its money to be able to function just about immediately. But you get a chance to make payments to somebody else, okay? And so that's a very nice balance. For seniors don't have the same opportunity as younger people, where younger people have mortgages. Most seniors' homes are paid off years ago, and so they get their bill in a lump sum, a big tax bill, whereas normal mortgage holders pay a monthly amount to the mortgage companies who then pay the bills. A much easier process than seniors. So we basically simulated that payment plan for seniors. If you qualify for a senior exemption, which the Board of Assessors give you, then you can call our office to set up a payment plan for paying off your debt. And so we give payment plans for up to 12 months. And so you could get payment plans from us. That doesn't put a burden on the governments because the amount of monies or revenues coming from seniors is not a significant portion of the bills that the county or the school board has to pay. So I could afford to do that without hurting the government. But at the end of the day, at the end of the year, the collection year, we are up to over 99%. And so whatever payment plan or accommodations I make for seniors don't hurt any of the governments, but at least it gives seniors peace of mind.
What I find is people need to communicate and educate themselves because a lot of people buy properties and they may not be as educated on that. What would you say confuses people the most?
The responsibility to pay taxes, I don't think confuses anybody. They have been paying federal income tax, and the federal government doesn't even send you a bill. They just say, send us what you owe us, okay? And we'll audit it if you do it improperly. But we send out bills, which would be reminders. So every property gets a bill. If you receive an official notice from the government, I think you should open that envelope and you'll see that you have a bill. Any bills that are unpaid, whether it's from a corporation or the school or any place, you should pay attention to a bill, okay? I think what confuses people sometimes is when they appeal their values. Remember, you cannot appeal taxes, but you could appeal the value of the property. When they appeal the value, we usually bill at 85%. Or if you want it, we'll bill you at 100%. But 85% is a normal billing rate when you appeal a value. When that appeal is resolved, some people do not pay attention. It doesn't mean that you don't have to pay the rest. You may have a residual bill coming because your appeal didn't go all the way down to where you think it was going to go, and so you'll have an additional bill there. Some mortgage companies do not pick up that additional bill, and therefore that's where some problems arise, in that little residual bill may become delinquent because a mortgage company did not come back to pick up that little amount. And so people after the appeal would forget about it and think the mortgage companies would take care of it. Always go back and look to see what happens after your appeal has resolved. You may sometimes owe some money. You don't always get a refund. And so that I think people should be a little careful of during that period if they appeal their values.
Can they find all of this on your website?
Everything is online.
That status?
Everything is online. Your current bill is online. You can go to fultoncountytaxes.org and you could check on your bill. And so there should be no excuse for somebody not knowing the status of their bill at any time or their exemptions at any time. Everything is either there on my office site or the Board of Assessors office site. You can always go there, look at your exemptions. If you have a question, you can always call and ask a question about the facts associated with your property.
Now, we're going to put that number on the screen. Can you tell us what number we should be calling?
From a tax standpoint, it's good to go on fultoncountytaxes.org and you'll see everything there.
Okay, very good. So take me through it. Let's say I wanted to buy a delinquent tax lien.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that I get the property.
No. You don't even get the right to walk on that property. You just get the right to put yourselves in my shoes and collect on that debt. And very often people think that not very often anymore, because they're pretty well educated now, that paying a lien does not give you ownership of that property. It just gives you the right to collect that money. It's a much longer process to eventually acquire that property if the debt isn't paid. But you don't get the right to do anything. You don't even get the right to clean up the property. And so that's why, for example, the city of Atlanta would have demolition liens against some of those properties because the lien holder is not the property owner and have no right to go on that property. You can go collect rent. It's not yours. Okay? And so all you have is a lien. That's it. No property rights.
And that is the first Tuesday of the month?
On the first Tuesday of the month, those auctions take place on the Fulton County courts, on the county courthouse steps in every county in the state of Georgia, unless a judge moves it to some other place. but the law specifies that the auctions of property take place on the courthouse steps on the first Tuesday at 10 o'clock of every month
Okay.
by the
Now,
sheriff.
by the sheriff. I've seen some unusual things at the auction. I seem to recall there have been cars and other goods. Does your office deal with that?
No,
Okay.
no. I do not conduct those sales. The sheriff conducts all the sales of property on the quarter steps. But also in that mix, you'll find banks foreclosing on properties. And so there's a lot going on that quarter steps besides the tax commissioner. There are other things like mechanics liens, banks, repossessing homes and that sort of things. So it's more than just us on the quarter steps.
Okay. Because I've seen some companies that are set up there.
With tents,
Okay.
especially in the
Yes.
summertime or in inclement weather. Those are probably banks or other type folks who are involved in that kind of business.
Where are those liens published?
The
Are
liens,
things that are available, rather?
it's on the county website. You'll see every property. Property information is public information, so you could go on the tax commission site in any state and see which properties are delinquent and by how much, and whether there are liens on it. And you could decide what liens you want. We even have a website with all the delinquent taxes on it, and so you could get access to that site where all the delinquent properties are listed sequentially.
Okay. But going back to the point of view of the homeowner, the taxpayer, there are many options for them to make sure that they can to pay their obligation. I mean, as much as possible.
As much as possible. In fact, you can sign up to get an email notifying you of the property tax when they become due, and so you could sign up. Just as we send out paper bills, we send out electronic bills also. So if you are in Singapore, you could get it you could get a notification on your cell phone saying that the tax bills are out, and then and it'll have your QR code there, and you could, take your QR code and go into the tax bill and the tax site and see how much you owe. And so traveling doesn't give you an excuse not to see your bill. Use your cell phone. We notify you on your cell phone. We send out texts, emails as alternatives to just a paper bill. And of course, it's online at all times. In fact, it's online before the bills even go out.
And I remember when there was the cyber attack, it was a big deal for the payment system to get back online. That was critical to the county.
It was critical to the county, and we got back online very, very quickly because our data was not harmed, and our software provider was able to take that data, and we were back up within 2 days.
Excellent.
Yeah, we were back up. So we didn't lose very much during the cyber attacks. Our data was secured, and our software provider was able to get us back online very, very quickly without any delays to any of the revenue. We didn't miss one revenue distribution to any one of our municipalities during that attack.
Well, I'm thankful to say that on behalf of the employees of Fulton County, we want to thank you because our checks come regularly.
I like those checks also. There's a little self-interest here. I want to make sure.
Well, we got to keep the lights on.
We got to keep the lights on. That's right. That's
got to
right.
keep the services going for people.
That's exactly correct. Yeah.
So when you're not here, and you're here a lot, I see you here in the building a lot, and I know that you run a big office, you have a lot of responsibilities, but when you're not here, what is the main thing that you are doing?
Well, besides being tax commissioner, I'm also a cattle rancher. I raise cattle. So I don't always look like this, and I don't always smell like this. I'm a rancher. I'm out there on a farm with cattle. I raise black Angus cattle. These are beef cattle. And so I run that operation by myself. My wife and I, that's what we do. So I sell bulls, I sell heifers, I sell meat. And so that's what I do.
How many head of cattle?
I usually keep about 50. When I retire, which I don't know when, I'll probably increase that. But I have the capacity to have more. But since I'm working it by myself, 50 is what I think I could reasonably handle. It seems a lot to you, but I've set up my ranch so that I could operate it, by myself. It's deliberately set up so that I could be basically self-sufficient. So that's what I do.
That's very interesting. I know there's a lot of interest now in cattle, in westerns, and so people are seeing that more and learning a little bit more about that life. So, what about the cycle? You were telling me a little earlier when we were chatting that it was important for children to understand the cycle.
Yes, it is important for children to understand where the food comes from. And I make pains to make sure that children aren't put out by what they see in a farm. And so when a child comes to my farm, they usually, in fact, I had a couple this weekend, and one was about 7, one was about 5. And they were enthralled because they saw little babies out there. And then their mothers could explain to them that this is the meat we are eating. And the kids were reacting to the nice hamburgers, And so, but then they understand that those animals there is basically their food source. And I remember delivering meat to a customer recently, and the father was explaining the food cycle, and he says, "Oh, our kids understand it because we also buy pork." And they went to the farm where they bought the pigs, and the little girl was saying to the little pigs that were running around, the little shoals, "Oh, little piggy, you all taste so good." So this child, at a very young age, understand the life cycle and how the food source comes, and kids should understand it so they could be protective of the food sources also. Food just doesn't come from the grocery; it comes from hard work, from the ground, from people working, and it's a life cycle. And so I try to make sure that the life cycle for these animals are also one that is a happy life. I don't have stressed out animals on my farm. I make sure that I could communicate with the animals on my farm. And I don't know, I sent you some pictures where you could see me interacting with a couple of my bulls, and bulls could be hard-headed. That's why you hear hard-headed, bullheaded. That's where it comes from. Bulls could be very dangerous and hard-headed. And so I try to communicate with my animals and take care of the environment as much as I could.
So grass-fed?
The animals are grass-fed. And I say grass-fed in the spring and in the summer. In the wintertime, the grass dies down because these are Bermuda, just like your lawn. It becomes gray, brown. And so then we move to hay. And so these are big bales of hay, and I buy a lot of hay, and hay is very expensive. And so there's equipment to move the hay around, et cetera, et cetera. And so a grass-fed is grass all year round, and then you get into hay. So it's green grass, and then a mixture of green grass and hay. And so what the animals live on, and of course the minerals. Just like you, animals need minerals.
And we need temperate weather?
Not necessary. These animals live outdoors. The black Angus is a Scottish breed, and so they're used to cold weather, where they came from genetically. And so at the first slight of cold weather, almost like overnight, that shiny coat becomes a woolly kind of coat to give them shelter. And then in the spring, then they start shedding that. And by May, June, you see a different kind of shiny, slick skin, slick coat. And so they are prepared for weather, and they live outside all year round. In the summertime, they go to the shade. In the wintertime, they're out, and in moderate winter, the babies are running around and skimping and playing just like kids do, because they like that cold weather.
And this is also dangerous work. And you being our tax commissioner, and we know you, we want you to be safe, but people may not understand how dangerous it can be.
It is a very dangerous job. First of all, you're operating heavy equipment. Tractors, bobcats, sometimes bulldozers. There are trees falling, always working with dead trees falling across fences, fixing lines. But also you're working with animals, and these are large animals. These animals my bulls weigh over 2,000 pounds, The mamas weigh up to about, 1,200 pounds. And so you have to be very careful. You don't want one of these animals stepping in your toes or foot or instep, that'll be just a crush. Bulls are temperamental. And I remember in my first foray into this business, I bought a bull. He was young, but he grew up there. He wasn't born there, and he tried to kill me. And so he was beefed the next day. He was beefed the next day. And since that time, I grew my own bulls and had a relationship with each one of those bulls. And that's why those pictures I send you where you see me in a relationship with those bulls. I could talk to them, I could call them, I could pat them and pet them, but still they're bulls. You always have to know where bulls are. Could be very dangerous. And so the dangers come from all factors. It comes from equipment, it comes from animals, it could come from trees and weather. There's sometimes you might get caught out there in a thunderstorm with lightning, so you got to be careful about all those kind of things too.
And also keeping them healthy.
And keeping them healthy. Well, if you keep them in good minerals, they should be healthy. If you have grass at a certain height, that also keeps them healthy. And so I mix my own minerals. I know what the requirements are, and I have a big cement factory, a cement mixer in my thing, and I mix my own minerals of food-grade materials that I give my animals. So they're always well into their minerals. Never miss that. Very important. Just like you have your minerals and your vitamins and things like that.
So this is a science as well.
It is. In the beginning, I knew nothing about this stuff. I just know I wanted to get back to the land because I'm a country boy, basically, growing up.
Where are you from?
I'm from Trinidad and Tobago.
Ah.
But I'm in the country part. I'm not from a city. I'm from the country.
Not the tourist area?
No. I'm a country boy. I grew up, catching crabs and catching birds and, all that stuff in the country. And so that's basically what I like. And so I got back to that in a different way. I grew up with, I think I got my first 2 goats when I was about 5. And that was my responsibility. And I also planted gardens during that time. And so I was just getting back into that mode. And so I just like that life. So when I'm not like this, I smell badly.
That's hard
I'm working
to imagine.
outside. I'm working. I'm working. That's I spent my days at home outside doing something. There's always something for me to do with the animals or the ranch or the pastures or the woods or the fences and things like that.
Wow. I would just like to say thank you because I know it takes a lot to get the food on the table. And there are farmers like you, cattlemen like you, who are doing this work, and I want to thank you for that. It's very important. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that recognition.
And the other piece of it is thank you for collecting taxes and making sure that we keep the lights on in Fulton County.
My pleasure. My
And
pleasure.
all the services that Fulton County provides comes back to your office, basically, making sure that these taxes are paid and collected properly.
That's correct. It's one of the things that we take great pride in our office, to make sure that we have that collection rate at that high level. That means everybody is paying their fair share, which means that each person pays a little less. When the collection rate was very low, the millage rate was high. As more people paid, the millage rate also comes down. And so it's important that you keep a millage rate, a collection rate high, so that the governments could get every nickel they anticipate to provide the services that they do. If the collection rate drops, it is very likely that millage rates will go up. And so we take pride in making sure that doesn't happen for the county or the schools or anyone in the cities we collect for. And so we look at that very carefully. It's the only key KPI, as we call it, key production indicator that I have. That's the only one I want, the collection rate. Make sure it is appropriate for the county.
And we always close our interviews and ask if you have any final thoughts, any final points that you want to make to us.
I would say this year in particular, pay close attention to those notices that you get from the Board of Assessors, because it's changed a little bit. Because the law changed this year, and you're no longer going to see your estimated property tax, you're going to see an estimated rollback rate. So you got to look at that. Because of this law, your tax bill is going to look a little different. We have to restructure that tax bill to put in some additional lines required by the new laws. So your tax bill is going to be a little different. But everything else is going to remain the same. You are going to get, we have a new exemption. And that exemption would give us a choice to choose between the existing CPI exemption you have or the new one by the state, and you'll get the better of the two.
You said CPI?
Yes, Consumer Price Index. It's one of those bills that regulates how high taxes could go, or how high the taxable value could go. It's an increase of 3% or the CPI, Consumer Price Index, whichever is the highest. And that's the only increase you can see in the taxable value of your property. And there's a 71 just passed this year by the state. And so we'll choose the better of the two for each taxpayer. So you don't have to worry about that. We'll take care of that for you. So those are the only changes this year. But again, I think the county is in great shape. I think the board does a phenomenal job in making sure that all services are there. We have a great county manager, Dick Anderson, who runs the departments in the best way I've seen ever since I've been in office, and I've been here a long time. Longer
Yes,
than
you
anybody.
have.
And so I think the county is in a very, very good position. They have a good board, and they have a good administrator and the county manager and his staff.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. I've learned a lot, and I've also learned a lot about cattle, because that is one of my interests. And I have to say, I have been watching these shows that look at that industry, and it's really fascinating.
It is. Do I look like one of those cowboys?
You could be. Put on a hat and the boots. You got it.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. This is Talk Fulton on FGTV. I'm Tracy Flanagan, and we look forward to you joining us again when we have another fascinating conversation to talk about services available in Fulton County and the people making that possible. Thank you again for joining us.